A small Georgia town, late afternoon, the kind of sun that gilds every brick on the main street like the place is holding its breath. A restaurant on the corner, faded green sign, a pot of tired petunias by the step, closed for 3 years, inside dust catching the light, a wall of photographs of a woman who has been dead for almost 2 decades, and one empty space, hand-lettered, for her when she comes home. A bus pulls up 2 blocks away. A girl steps off with a garbage bag and $47. She does not know about the letters. She does not know about the cassette. She fits a brass key into the lock. The mechanism resists, then turns. She found the cassette tape 3 days later, in a drawer underneath her grandmother's recipe book, a drawer that hadn't been opened in 3 years. She didn't know yet whose voice was on the tape. She didn't know yet that her whole life was about to crack open like an egg dropped on a kitchen floor. She just knew that the morning had started with $47 folded in her pocket, and a black garbage bag of clothes, and the feeling that the world had finally officially run out of places to put her. Her name was Hattie Brennan. She was 18 years old, and she did not yet know that she was loved. The group home smelled like burned toast and industrial bleach. Hattie had been awake since 4, not because she wanted to be, because her bed wouldn't let her sleep past dawn anymore. Not since the calendar started counting down. Not since she figured out what March 8th meant. 18. That was the magic number, the one that turned a child into a problem the state didn't have to feed anymore. She lay still on the narrow mattress, counted ceiling tiles like she always did when sleep wouldn't come. 14 across, 9 down, 126 tiles between her and the world that had never once said her name like it meant something good. She'd been counting those tiles for 2 years and 4 months. This was the last morning. She knew it. The tiles knew it. The girl in the room next door who whimpered in her sleep like a kicked dog, she knew it too, because Hattie heard her stop, heard the silence shift, like the whole house was holding its breath, waiting to push her out. At 7, the knock came. Hattie, today's the day. The voice belonged to a woman named Karen. Karen had a clipboard for everything. Karen had a clipboard for the day a kid turned 18. Hattie didn't answer. She was already packed. Everything she owned in this world fit inside a black garbage bag and a backpack with a busted zipper. 3 shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, underwear, a toothbrush, a library card from the Atlanta public system, and a thin silver chain with a cracked jade pendant. The pendant had been her mother's. She'd been told that twice in her life, once by a foster mother named Mrs. Green when Hattie was 10, and once by a caseworker who later lost her file. It was your mama's baby. You hold on to it. So she held on to it. For 14 years, she had held on to it. She clasped the chain around her neck, pulled on the cleanest shirt she owned, checked the front pocket of her backpack one more time. $47. She had been saving for 2 years, $2 an hour for kitchen work in the back of the group home, peeling potatoes, scraping pans, mopping the floor at midnight when the night shift wouldn't. $47. That was what 18 years of being a problem had earned her. She walked downstairs. The front office was warm, the kind of warm that wasn't on purpose, just the kind where the radiator hissed too loud and nobody bothered to fix it. Karen slid a manila folder across the desk. Birth certificate, medical records, list of housing services. Hattie picked up the folder. You should call the housing line, Hattie. Sometimes they place kids in shelters. Do you have somewhere to go? Hattie looked at her. She had not slept. She had $47. She had a garbage bag. She had no apartment, no job, no family, no plan, no map, no idea what came next. Yeah, she said. She was good at lying. The system taught you that early. You learned to make adults feel better about leaving you. It was a skill. Karen reached into her drawer, pulled out a granola bar. Be careful out there, Hattie. Thank you. She took the granola bar, walked out the front door. And just like that, she was nobody's problem anymore. She walked 6 blocks to the public library. The morning was that kind of March that couldn't pick a season. Cold in the shadows, warm in the sun. The air smelled like wet concrete and somebody's coffee from down the block. She walked slow, garbage bag in one hand, backpack on one shoulder. The library opened at 9. She knew because she had spent more hours inside that building than any other building in Atlanta. The stacks were warm, the chairs were soft. Nobody asked you to leave as long as you were reading. And once a long time ago, when she was 12 and had nowhere to go after school, a librarian named Mrs. Caldwell had handed her a copy of To Kill a Mockingbird and said, "Read this, then come back and tell me what you think." Hattie had read it in 3 days. She came back, told Mrs. Caldwell exactly what she thought, and Mrs. Caldwell had cried a little, quietly, the kind of crying that grown women do when a child shows them she's been paying attention to something they didn't think any child was paying attention to anymore. That had been 6 years ago. Mrs. Caldwell still worked there. Hattie pushed through the library doors at 9:03. The smell hit her. Paper, old wood, lemon polish, the kind of smell that meant safe, or as close to safe as Hattie had ever known. Mrs. Caldwell looked up from the front desk. She was a small woman now, smaller than Hattie remembered, hair almost all silver, reading glasses on a beaded chain. She wore a cardigan the color of a dusty rose. She saw Hattie, then she saw the garbage bag. She understood. "Today," she said. It wasn't a question. Hattie nodded. Mrs. Caldwell came out from behind the desk. She didn't hug Hattie. She knew better than that. She knew foster kids didn't always do well with sudden touch. Instead, she just stood there, close enough that Hattie could smell her perfume, something old-fashioned, lavender maybe. "Sit down, sweetheart," Mrs. Caldwell said. "I have something for you." She disappeared into the back office. Hattie sat on the wooden bench by the front window. She waited. The bench was the same bench she had sat on at 12 years old, reading about Atticus Finch. The wood was warmer than she remembered, or maybe she was colder. Mrs. Caldwell came back. She was holding a white envelope. "This came for you yesterday." Hattie blinked. "For me, addressed to you, care of the library." Hattie took the envelope. It was thick, heavy. The return address was printed in small, sharp letters. Whitlock and Associates, Attorneys at Law, Linden Creek, Georgia. She didn't know anyone named Whitlock. She had never heard of Linden Creek. She turned the envelope over. Her hands were shaking. She didn't notice they were shaking until she tried to slide her thumb under the seal and missed. Mrs. Caldwell sat down next to her on the bench. She didn't say anything. Hattie opened the envelope. Inside was a single typed letter and taped to a square of cardboard. A key, old brass, slightly tarnished. The kind of key that opened something solid, something old. Hattie pulled the letter free. She read, "Dear Miss Brennan, my name is Frank Whitlock, and I am the executor of the estate of Pearl Whitaker, who passed away on July 9th of last year. Mrs. Whitaker was your maternal grandmother. She left specific instructions in her will that upon your 18th birthday, you were to be located and given full ownership of her property at 412 Linden Lane, Linden Creek, Georgia, known locally as Pearl's Porch. The enclosed key opens the front door. Mrs. Whitaker asked me to convey the following message to you in her own words. Tell her I never stopped looking. Tell her the door is open." Hattie read it once. She read it twice. The words did not change, but the meaning kept rearranging itself in her head, like puzzle pieces sliding into a picture she wasn't ready to see. Maternal grandmother. She had a grandmother. Had. The woman was dead, had been dead for 8 months, and had left Hattie a restaurant. "Mrs. Caldwell." "Yes, baby." "I had a grandmother." Hattie's voice broke on the second word. The past tense was a knife. The past tense was the door closing as it opened. Mrs. Caldwell read the letter over Hattie's shoulder. Her hand went to her mouth. "Linden Creek, That's down past Macon, little town maybe 3 hours south, near Auchmulgee. Hattie stared at the key. She had been told all her life that her mother's family was gone, that nobody on that side wanted her. Caseworkers had said it in the careful, pitying voice grown-ups used when a kid's story was too sad to look at directly. Your mama's people are gone, honey. There's nobody on that side. She had believed it, because what else do you do when you grow up in the system except believe what they tell you? You stop asking. You learn that asking only leads to silence. But here in her hand was a key and a letter from a dead woman who shared her blood, a woman who, according to a lawyer in a town Hattie had never heard of, had spent her dying breath asking someone to find her granddaughter. Tell her I never stopped looking. The world Hattie had carried for 14 years cracked right down the middle. I have to go, she said. Mrs. Caldwell stood up. I'll drive you to the bus station. I don't have. I'll buy your ticket. Mrs. Caldwell, I can't. Hattie, the librarian looked her in the eye. I have been waiting 6 years for someone to come and tell you that you mattered, and it sounds like someone did. So you let me drive you to that bus station, and you let me buy you that ticket, and when you get there, you call me. You hear me? Hattie nodded. She did not trust her voice. Mrs. Caldwell pulled a small notebook from her cardigan pocket, scribbled a phone number, tore the page out, pressed it into Hattie's hand. You call me when you get there. Promise me. I promise. The Greyhound left Atlanta at 11:15. Hattie sat by the window, garbage bag on the seat beside her, backpack at her feet, the key in her front pocket pressing against her thigh like a small warm coin. She watched the city thin out. Shopping centers gave way to pine forests. The highway narrowed from 6 lanes to 4, then to 2. Red clay shoulders appeared along the road. Farmland opened up in broad, flat stretches. Barns, silos, churches with white steeples and signs out front that said things like "Pray harder" and "God's mercy is new every morning." Hattie ate the granola bar. She watched the world change through fingerprint glass. She did not let herself think, because thinking led to questions, and questions led to a place she was not ready to go. Questions like, why did nobody ever tell me? And where was she all this time? And the worst one, the one that crouched in the back of her head like a small, mean animal. Did she know I was alive? Hattie pressed her forehead against the window. The glass was cool. She closed her eyes. She slept for the first time in 2 days. The bus pulled into Linden Creek a little after 2 in the afternoon. The stop wasn't a station, it was a bench and a sign on the shoulder of the main road through town. Hattie stepped off. The driver looked at her, at the garbage bag, at the backpack, at the lost puppy look of an 18-year-old girl in a town she didn't know. You got people here, Hattie thought about that. Maybe, she said. The driver nodded, like that was as good an answer as he expected from anyone who got off a bus in Linden Creek with a garbage bag. He closed the door and pulled away. Hattie stood on the side of the road. Linden Creek was small. One main street lined with brick storefronts, some occupied, some empty, a hardware store, a diner with a hand-painted sign that read Birdie's, a post office, a church with a white steeple at the far end of the road, pickup trucks angled along the curb, a few people walking the sidewalks, a black dog sleeping in a patch of sun. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt on purpose, like the town had decided a long time ago that noise was unnecessary. Hattie walked. She had the address, 412 Linden Lane. A woman coming out of the post office pointed her in the right direction. 2 blocks down. Take a left. You can't miss it. Hattie walked 2 blocks down. She took the left. And there it was, a single-story brick building on the corner of Linden and Main, a wide front window, a painted sign above the door that read, Pearl's Porch in faded green script. The building was old, but not ruined. The brickwork was clean. The window glass was intact. The step in front of the door had been swept recently. There was a small terracotta pot by the door with a tired-looking petunia in it. Someone had been taking care of this place. Hattie stood on the sidewalk. She looked at the building for a long time. A restaurant her grandmother had run, a restaurant Hattie had never seen, in a town Hattie had never visited, built by a woman Hattie had never known, and now it belonged to her. An 18-year-old with $47 and a garbage bag. She pulled the key from her pocket. The brass was warm from her body heat. She climbed the single step, fitted the key into the lock, turned it. The mechanism resisted, then gave way. A heavy click, the kind of click old locks make, the kind that says, "I've been waiting for you." She pushed the door open. The smell hit her first. Not dust, not mildew, not the dead smell of a closed building. Something else. Lemon oil, old wood, and underneath everything a faint, impossible trace of cooking spices, cumin, garlic, something sweet she couldn't name. The restaurant smelled like someone had been cooking in it. Recently, even though the letter said it had been closed for 3 years, Hattie stepped inside. The afternoon light came through the front window in long gold rectangles. The dining room was small, maybe 10 tables, each one covered with a white tablecloth protected by clear plastic. The chairs were wooden, mismatched, sturdy, pushed neatly into place. A long counter ran along the left wall, 6 stools, a pass-through window into the kitchen. Everything was clean, not just preserved, maintained. No cobwebs, no dust on the tables. The floor had been mopped. The windows had been washed. Someone had been coming here, keeping this place alive while it waited. But it was the walls that stopped her cold. Every wall was covered in framed photographs, dozens of them. And in photograph after photograph, the same face looked back at her. A young woman, dark hair, wide smile, Hattie's exact jawline, Hattie's exact eyes, her mother, Ruth Whitaker, maybe 20 years old, laughing in a kitchen with flour on her nose. Ruth standing in front of this very building on what must have been opening day. A banner behind her that read, "Grand Opening." Ruth holding a baby wrapped in a yellow blanket. Hattie recognized the blanket. She had seen it once, in a photo, in a caseworker's file, when she was 9 years old. That baby was her. Hattie's legs went soft. She grabbed the edge of the counter and held on. Her mother was everywhere in this room. Every wall, every surface, every corner. Pearl had turned this restaurant into a gallery of Ruth's life, a place where her daughter would never be forgotten, where anyone who walked through the door would know immediately and without question who Ruth Whitaker had been, and that she had been loved. Hattie walked along the wall slowly. She studied each photograph. Ruth as a teenager sitting on a porch railing with a guitar across her lap. Ruth in a graduation cap and gown, eyes shining. Ruth in this kitchen stirring something in a massive pot, looking over her shoulder at the camera with a grin that said, "Get out of my kitchen." Ruth holding baby Hattie on her hip, both of them squinting into the sun. In every picture, Ruth looked happy. She looked like someone who had been deeply, unquestionably loved. Hattie reached the end of the long wall. The photograph stopped. A clean stretch of plaster began, and there pinned to a small corkboard, a single sheet of yellow paper, handwritten, the ink slightly faded. "This wall is for Hattie's pictures, for when she comes home." The air left her chest. An empty wall, waiting for photos that didn't exist yet, of a life that hadn't been lived yet, in a place she hadn't known was hers. Pearl had left a space for her, a literal physical space on the wall of this restaurant reserved for a granddaughter the world had told her was dead. Hattie pressed her palm flat against the empty wall. The plaster was cool under her fingers. She stayed like that for a long time. She did not cry, not yet, because crying was a luxury, and she had not yet figured out if this was a safe place to spend it. She turned around. That was when she saw the envelope, on the counter, beside the cash register, cream-colored, thick, the kind of envelope meant for important documents, Across the front, in careful cursive handwriting, someone had written, "For Hattie. When she comes home." Hattie walked over. She picked it up. The paper was heavy in her hands. She felt something inside the envelope, beyond just a letter, something stiff, a photograph maybe, or a card. She ran her thumb under the seal. The envelope opened. She did not read what was inside, not yet, because just then the front door of the restaurant opened. A man was standing in the doorway. He was old, maybe close to 80, full head of white hair, face like something carved out of hardwood. He wore a canvas work jacket and heavy boots and stood with the slightly bow-legged stance of a man who had spent his whole life on his feet. His eyes, deep set and dark, were fixed on Hattie's face. His expression was one she could not read. Hattie clutched the envelope against her chest. The man did not move. He stood in the doorway, looking at her. For a long second, neither of them spoke. Then the man said very quietly, "You look just like her." His voice was rough, the kind of rough that comes from a lifetime of not talking much. "Like who?" Hattie said. The man's eyes did not move from her face. "Like Ruth." Hattie's throat went dry. "Who are you?" "Earl Tucker." He paused. His hand stayed on the doorframe, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to come in, even though this had probably been his second home for 30 years. "I own the hardware store next door." "Well, owned? I'm retired now." He nodded toward the dining room behind her. "Pearl told me you'd come. I promised her I'd be here when you did." Hattie stared at him. "You knew her?" "I knew her for 41 years. He stepped inside, slowly, the way a man steps into a church. He took off his cap and held it in both hands. "I've been the one keeping the lights on, the water running, the locks oiled, mopping the floors every Tuesday. Pearl asked me to, before she died." He looked around the dining room, at the photographs, at the empty wall, at the counter where Hattie still stood clutching the envelope. His eyes were wet. He didn't bother to hide it. "She told me," Earl said, "the day before she went into the hospital. She said, 'Earl, if I don't make it, you keep this place ready, because she's coming. Maybe not next year, maybe not in 5 years, but she's coming.'" He swallowed hard. "And I said, 'Pearl, how can you be so sure?' And she said," his voice broke. He stopped, cleared his throat, tried again. "She said because a grandmother knows." Hattie's knees gave out. She sat down hard on one of the counter stools. The envelope crinkled against her chest. Earl Tucker stood in the middle of the dining room holding his cap, looking at a girl he had never met but had been waiting for 3 years. He made her tea. He did it without asking, the way old men do things when they are not sure what else to do with their hands. He went behind the counter, filled a kettle from the sink, put it on a small electric burner that had a faded label on it that said, "For tea only, Pearl." He moved around the kitchen the way a man moves in a house he has lived in for years. He took down 2 mugs from a hook. He found tea bags in a drawer. He poured. He set the mug in front of Hattie on the counter. He sat down on the stool next to her, the third stool from the left. She would later learn that this was his stool, that for 40 years he had sat in that exact spot, that Pearl had ordered a small brass plate for it once as a joke, and it had said, "Reserved for Earl." He had insisted she take it down, said it made him feel old. Pearl had laughed at him and put it in a drawer. Hattie didn't know any of that yet. She just held the mug. The steam curled up into her face. It smelled like chamomile and honey and something else, lavender maybe. She took a sip. It was the first hot thing she had put in her body in 3 days. "Pearl looked for you," Earl said. His voice was low, steady. "For 14 years, she looked for you. She hired investigators. She wrote letters. She drove to Atlanta. She sat in courthouses. She filled binders with paperwork. She paid lawyers. She talked to anybody who would listen." He took a sip of his own tea, and a lot of people wouldn't listen. Hattie's hands tightened around the mug. "Why?" Earl looked at her. "That's a long story." I have time. He almost smiled. You don't yet. You just got off a bus. You need to eat. You need to sleep. You need to look around this place and figure out what's yours. Mr. Tucker, Earl, I just walked into a restaurant I didn't know I had. I just learned I had a grandmother. There's a wall in there with my name on it. She stopped because the next word was going to come out as a sob, and she did not want to sob in front of a stranger. Earl Tucker, ancient and wise in the way only certain old men get to be, did not look at her. He looked at his tea. He gave her the gift of not seeing. I'll tell you what, he said after a long moment. I'll come back tomorrow morning, 7:30. I'll bring breakfast. We'll sit at this counter, and I'll tell you everything I know. He paused. There's a room in this back, behind the office. Pearl used to sleep there sometimes, when she was too tired to drive home. There's a cot, a blanket, clean sheets in the closet. You're welcome to it tonight. Hattie's voice came out smaller than she meant. Why are you being kind to me? Earl turned his head, looked at her, really looked at her. Because I made a promise to your grandmother, he said, and because you have her eyes. He stood up, pulled on his cap. He walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the knob. One more thing. Hattie looked up. What? Earl Tucker looked at the wall of photographs, then back at Hattie. Pearl knew you'd come. She didn't know when, but she knew, so she left things for you, all over this building. Little things, big things, letters, a journal, a recipe book, some other things. He paused. Take your time finding them. They were meant to be found slow. He tipped his cap, and he walked out. The bell above the door jingled as it closed. The restaurant was silent again. Hattie sat at the counter. She stared at her mug of tea. Her grandmother's tea. Her grandmother who had drunk this same chamomile from this same mug at this same counter, who had sat where Hattie was sitting now, who had looked maybe at the same patch of late afternoon light on the same floor. Hattie put her face in her hands, and she cried, not the careful foster kid cry she had perfected over 14 years, not the quiet swallow-it-down cry that didn't wake roommates. She cried the loud, ugly, full-bodied cry of a child who has just found out for the first time that somebody wanted her. She slept that night on the cot in the back room. Earl had been right. Clean sheets in the closet, a blanket folded at the foot of the cot, a small lamp on a side table with a yellow shade that turned the whole room the color of old butter. There was a window above the cot. The window looked out on the back alley. Hattie lay on her side and stared at the bricks of the building across the alley until they blurred. She thought she would not sleep. She slept for 9 hours. She had not slept 9 hours since she was a child. A knock at the front door woke her. She sat up. The light through the window was pale gold. Morning light. The kind of morning light that meant it had been a while since sunrise. She pulled on her shoes, smoothed her shirt, walked through the kitchen, through the dining room, to the front door. A woman stood on the step. She was maybe 50, broad shoulders, dark hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She was holding a cardboard box. You must be Hattie, the woman said. Hattie nodded. I'm Bertie. I run the diner across the street. Earl told me you were here. Hattie blinked. Earl told you? Earl told everybody sugar. I think that man has been waiting 3 years to make that phone call. I woke up at 6 this morning. Bertie, she's here. Bring the eggs. Bertie shifted the box in her arms. You gonna let me in, or should I just stand here all morning? Hattie stepped aside. Bertie walked in. She walked in the way people in small towns walk into places where they know they belong. She didn't look around. She didn't gawk. She knew exactly where the counter was. She set the box down on it. Then she did look around, slowly, at the photographs of Ruth on every wall, at the empty section with the yellow note. Bertie's mouth tightened. She said quietly, almost to herself, Pearl, you sweet, stubborn old thing. Then she turned to Hattie. You look like you haven't eaten in a week. That wasn't a question. Bertie started unpacking the box. Eggs, a pound of bacon, a loaf of sourdough bread still warm from her diner's oven, a jar of homemade peach preserves, a tub of butter, a small glass bottle of cream. She set it all out on the counter like she was setting a table for company. "Kitchen's clean," she said. "Earl's been mopping it weekly. Stove works." Pearl had it serviced 6 months before she passed. The walk-in cooler's been running on a timer. Empty, but running. You'll need to stock it. "Mrs. Bertie, you don't what? I can't pay you for any of this." Bertie stopped unpacking. She looked at Hattie. The look on her face was something Hattie had never seen before. It was the look of a woman who was choosing deliberately and fully to be patient, the way a mother chooses to be patient with a child who has been told too many wrong things. "Sweetheart," Bertie said, "your grandmother fed this town for 17 years. She fed me. She fed my husband, God rest him. She fed my kids when my kids were small. She fed every preacher and every drunk and every farmer for 40 miles. She fed people when they didn't have money. She fed people when they had too much money and not enough sense. She fed everybody." Bertie's eyes were wet. She did not pretend they weren't. "You don't pay me for breakfast, baby. You eat it. And then later, when you can, you feed somebody else." She slid the carton of eggs across the counter. "That's how it works." Bertie cooked. She moved through Pearl's kitchen like she had cooked there 100 times. Maybe she had. She fried bacon. She scrambled eggs. She toasted thick slices of sourdough. She set everything on a plate and pushed it across the pass-through to Hattie. "Eat." Hattie ate. She ate like she hadn't eaten in 3 days. Because she hadn't. Bertie watched her without watching her, the way women of a certain age know how to do. "Slow down, sugar. It's not going anywhere." Hattie slowed down. When the plate was empty, Bertie filled it again. When Hattie had eaten the second plate, Bertie poured her coffee from a metal carafe she had brought in the box. "Now," Bertie said, "I'm going to tell you 3 things, and then I'm going to walk back across the street and run my own restaurant." "Okay?" Hattie nodded. 1. This town loved your grandmother. They are going to love you too because you are hers. That's how it works here. You will not have to ask for help. People will show up. Let them. 2. Earl Tucker is a stubborn old man who hasn't smiled in 3 years. He'll be at that stool every morning at 7:30. He doesn't say much, but what he does say is true. Trust him. 3. Bertie paused. She looked at Hattie. "Pearl left you a lot, more than the restaurant. She left you a story. Some of it is going to be hard to hear. Some of it is going to break your heart, but all of it is going to tell you that you were loved, even when you didn't know it, especially when you didn't know it." Bertie packed up the empty box. She walked to the door. She stopped. "Welcome home, Hattie Brennan." The bell jingled. She was gone. Hattie sat at the counter. She finished her coffee. She walked into the kitchen. She washed the dishes. She did them slowly. She did them carefully. She wiped down the counter. She dried each plate and stacked them on the rack the way she imagined her mother had once stacked them, the way her grandmother had stacked them, the way women who run kitchens for love have always stacked plates. Then she walked back into the dining room. She stood in front of the wall of photographs. She looked at her mother's face. "Hi, Mama," she said. It came out as a whisper. It was the first time in her life she had ever said the word Mama out loud to anyone. Her mother smiled back at her from the photographs. Hattie walked into the office behind the kitchen. It was a small room, a desk, a bookshelf, a filing cabinet, a window that looked out on the alley. The desk was neat, paper stacked, a small lamp, a framed photo of a silver-haired woman standing in the doorway of the restaurant with her arms open wide. Pearl. Hattie picked up the photo. She studied the face. Pearl had been thin. Her hair was the color of new aluminum. Her eyes were sharp. Her smile was the kind of smile that didn't ask for permission, the kind of smile a woman earns by surviving things. On the back of the photo in pencil, June 2019, waiting. Hattie set it down. She opened the top drawer of the desk. Inside, neatly arranged, were stacks of paper, files, receipts, tax records. She opened the second drawer, a leather journal, black cover worn soft, a red ribbon as a bookmark. She did not open it, not yet. She opened the third drawer, and that was when she found them, a stack of envelopes, 14 of them, each one addressed in the same careful cursive, each one bearing the same name, Hattie Brennan, each one stamped, none of them mailed. Hattie's hands began to shake. She lifted the stack out of the drawer. She set it on the desk. She read the dates on the postmark stamps. The earliest envelope was dated March 8th, 14 years ago, her 5th birthday. The most recent was dated March 8th of last year, her 17th birthday. 14 envelopes, 14 birthdays, 14 years of a woman writing letters to a granddaughter she could not find, stamping them, putting them in a drawer, because she had no address to send them to. Hattie sat down hard in the desk chair. She picked up the first envelope. The seal was old. The glue was cracked. She slid her thumb under the flap. The envelope opened. A single sheet of paper, folded once. She opened it. The handwriting was steady, confident. The hand of a woman in her mid-50s who still had years of letters left to write. My dear Hattie, today you are 5 years old. I don't know where you are. I don't know what they have told you. I don't know if you are eating well or sleeping safe, or if anyone is brushing your hair before bed. But I know you are alive. I know it the way a tree knows it is going to bloom in March even when there is still snow on the ground. I know it the way the morning knows it will come even at midnight. I know it because you are mine. And so I am going to write you a letter on every birthday until I find you, or until I die, whichever comes first. If you ever read this, my darling, I want you to know one thing only. Everything else can wait. You were wanted. You were wanted from the moment your mother knew you were coming. You were wanted on the day you were born. You were wanted on the day she died. You have been wanted every single day since. You have been wanted by me. Happy birthday, sweet girl. I love you. Grandma Pearl. Hattie read the letter 3 times. She read it until the words stopped making sense. She read it until they made too much sense. Then she set it down on the desk. She put her head down on her arms, and she wept like something inside her had been broken open, because it had. Outside the window, the morning was bright and warm and ordinary. A truck rolled past on the alley. A dog barked somewhere down the block. Bertie's diner across the street served biscuits and eggs and coffee to people who had no idea that 1 block away a girl named Hattie Brennan was learning for the first time in her 18-year-old life that she had been loved for 14 years by a woman she would never meet, whose voice she did not yet know, whose voice, in fact, she would hear 3 days later on a cassette tape in a drawer underneath a recipe book, a drawer she had not yet opened, a drawer that in 3 days' time would change her understanding of the word family forever. But that was 3 days from now. For now, Hattie Brennan held her grandmother's first letter against her chest, and she wept. And the door of Pearl's porch stayed open behind her, the way it had always been meant to. She read the first letter on a Tuesday. By Friday, she had read all 14. She read them slowly, 1 a day. She made herself stretch them out, because they were the only letters she would ever get from her grandmother, and once they were read, they would not be unread. She kept them stacked in order on the desk. She kept them in their envelopes. She read each one twice. She read each one out loud in the empty office just to hear her grandmother's words spoken by somebody, even if that somebody was just her. Each letter began the same way. My dear Hattie, today you are 6 years old. My dear Hattie, today you are 7. My dear Hattie, today you are 8. I imagine you have lost your front teeth by now. I imagine you are wild. Your mother was wild at 8. She climbed every tree in the county. The letters were not all sad. Some of them were funny. In the letter for her 9th birthday, Pearl had written, "I tried to make your mother's biscuit recipe again last night, Hattie. I burned them. I burned them so bad the smoke alarm went off and Earl came running over with a fire extinguisher, and I had to tell him I was just incompetent. He laughed at me for an hour. I love that man, but he can be a real horse's ass." Hattie laughed when she read that. Out loud, in the empty office. The sound surprised her. She had not laughed in a long time. Some of the letters were harder. The letter for her 12th birthday was just a single line. "I am tired, Hattie, but I will not stop. Happy birthday, my love." Hattie sat with that one for a long time. She tried to picture a woman in her late 60s, tired, alone, writing one sentence on a birthday card, sealing it, stamping it, putting it in a drawer with no address. That was the day Hattie decided she was going to open the restaurant, not because she knew how, not because she could afford to, not because anyone had asked her to, but because Pearl had built it, and because somebody ought to keep the lights on. Earl was at the counter at 7:30, like he had said he would be. He had brought biscuits in a paper bag. He set them on the counter without a word. He poured himself a cup of coffee from the pot Hattie had made. He sat on his stool, the third from the left. He read the newspaper. For 20 minutes, neither of them spoke. It was the kind of silence that wasn't empty. It was the kind of silence that had been built by old, careful people. The kind of silence that meant, "I am here. You are here. That is enough." Hattie ate a biscuit. "Earl, I want to open the restaurant." Earl folded the newspaper. He set it down. He looked at her. "When?" "I don't know yet. Soon. Maybe next Saturday." He nodded once. That was all. He did not say, "Are you sure?" He did not say, "That's a lot for a girl your age." He did not say, "You don't know what you're getting into." He said, "Then we got work to do," and he stood up, and he put down his coffee, and he walked into the kitchen like a man who had been waiting 3 years to do exactly that. He taught her the stove first. It was an old commercial range, 6 burners, a flat-top griddle. Pearl had owned it for 19 years. Earl had serviced it himself. He showed Hattie how to light the pilots, how to control the gas, how to tell when the cast iron was hot enough by holding her hand 6 inches above the surface and counting Mississippi. Mississippi 1, Mississippi 2, Mississippi 3. If you couldn't make it to Mississippi 3 without yanking your hand away, the iron was hot enough. She practiced. She held her palm over the iron until her hand was red and her eyes watered. Earl watched. He didn't say anything. He just nodded when she pulled away at Mississippi 3. "That's it," he said. That's how Pearl did it. He taught her the walk-in cooler, how the door latch, how the temperature gauge could lie when the compressor ran hot. He taught her where the breaker box was. He taught her where the spare keys were. He taught her the trick to the back door, which stuck in humid weather and had to be lifted up before you pulled it closed. He taught her everything an old man teaches a young woman when he is trying to give her a kitchen. Bertie came in the afternoon. She did not bring food this time. She brought a clipboard. "All right, Hattie, sit down." Hattie sat. Customer service, lesson 1. "Bertie, I waited tables in a group home cafeteria. I know how. You know how to serve glop to people who don't have a choice. That's not the same as serving food to people who chose to walk in your door." Bertie tapped the clipboard. "Lesson 1. You learn names, not just first names, last names. You learn what they drink. You learn what they're allergic to. You learn whose husband died. You learn whose grandbaby just graduated. You learn whose dog ran off. And you ask. Every time. Bertie, hush." Lesson 2. She kept going. She talked for an hour. She talked about how to refill coffee without interrupting a conversation, how to read a table that was ready to order versus a table that needed more time, how to handle the one drunk who would inevitably show up on a Friday night, how to comp a meal without making the customer feel like a charity case. Hattie wrote it all down. She wrote it on the back of a placemat. In pencil, she wrote until her hand cramped. When Birdie finally stopped, she patted Hattie's hand. "You're going to be all right." "I don't know if I am." "Sugar, I didn't say you knew it. I said you were." She left. The bell jingled. Hattie sat at the counter with her cramped hand and her placemat full of notes. She looked up at the wall, at her mother's photographs, at the empty space. "I'm trying," she said. To no one, to everyone. The first regular came on Thursday afternoon. The bell jingled. Hattie looked up from where she was wiping down the counter. A woman in her 60s stood in the doorway, soft, round face, gray hair in a French braid down her back. She was carrying a small bouquet of yellow tulips wrapped in newspaper. "You must be Hattie." "Yes, ma'am." "I'm Lou Pritchett. I own the flower shop down on Magnolia. I came because Earl told me you were here, and because I was your grandmother's best friend for 31 years. She held out the tulips. These were her favorite, yellow tulips. She used to put them on the counter every Tuesday. She said yellow was the color of forgiveness. Hattie took the flowers. Her hands were shaking again. "Miss Lou, I don't know what to—" "You don't have to say anything, sweetheart. I just wanted to look at your face." Miss Lou looked at her, really looked. Hattie felt something inside her chest tighten and then release, like a fist that had been clenched for 18 years was finally being asked to open. Miss Lou's eyes were wet. "She would have known you," she said quietly, "the minute you walked in. She would have known you. You have her chin, and you have Ruth's eyes, and you have something else, something that's yours, something nobody else has." "What?" Miss Lou smiled. "I'll tell you when I figure it out." She turned to leave. She stopped at the door. "I'll bring fresh flowers every Tuesday, like I used to bring them to her, free of charge, for as long as you want this place open." She left. The tulips were on the counter. Hattie put her hand against her mouth. She did not cry, but it was a near thing. The next regular came the same evening, Pastor Hank Bramley. He was a big man, tall, broad in the shoulders, white-haired. He wore a black shirt and a clergy collar that looked a little crooked. He took off his hat when he stepped inside. "Miss Brennan, Pastor, I won't keep you long. I just came to introduce myself and to say that your grandmother saved my life and that I owe her a debt I never paid, and that if there is ever anything I can do for you, you will tell me. You hear." "How did she save my life?" "Yes." Pastor Hank's eyes went somewhere a long way off. "My wife passed in 2008. I quit the church for a year. I drank. I quit drinking. I quit eating. I didn't quit grieving." He paused. "Your grandmother fed me lunch every single day for 14 months. I never paid for a single one of those meals. She never let me. She would just put a plate in front of me, and she would sit at the counter, and she would not say anything. She would just sit, and I would eat." His voice went thick. "Some women preach with their mouths. Pearl preached with her stove." He put his hat back on. He turned to leave. "Pastor." "Yes, Miss Brennan. What did you say to her at the end when she got sick?" Pastor Hank thought about it. "I told her that the table she had built was the closest thing to communion I had ever seen on this side of heaven." He left. The bell jingled. Hattie sat down at the counter. The yellow tulips were in front of her. She put her face in her hands. She made cornbread on Friday morning. It came from a recipe in Pearl's binder. The binder Earl had shown her on the second day. The binder filled with 2 different handwritings. One was loose and wild and confident, notes in the margin like "needs more salt" and "trust me on the buttermilk." That was Ruth. The other was careful cursive, filling in measurements, cooking times, notes that said things like "Ruth never measured this. I watched her make it 40 times before I got it right." That was Pearl. 2 women's voices, a daughter who cooked by feeling, a mother who translated feeling into something anyone could follow. Hattie opened the binder to the cornbread page. Ruth's note said "cornmeal, buttermilk, sugar, hot iron. You'll know when it's done." Pearl's translation said 2 cups, stone ground yellow cornmeal, 1 cup buttermilk, 1 tablespoon sugar, half teaspoon salt, quarter teaspoon baking soda, 1 egg, 2 tablespoons melted butter, cast iron skillet preheated to 400 degrees in the oven. Pour the batter into the screaming hot skillet, 20 minutes until golden. At the bottom in Pearl's hand, this was the first recipe I perfected. It took me 11 tries. On the 12th, Earl came over from next door, ate a piece, and said, "That's Ruth's cornbread." I sat down on the kitchen floor and I cried for an hour. Hattie read that note 3 times, then she went to the kitchen. She tried. The first one burned. The skillet was too hot. The batter scorched on the bottom before the inside set. She pulled it out, smelled the smoke, said no, dumped it in the trash, washed the skillet. The second one came out gummy. She had measured the buttermilk wrong, or the cornmeal. She didn't know which. She didn't know how Pearl had known to put the buttermilk in by feel. She poked the gummy bread with a fork. She threw it out. The third one was almost right, but it was dry, crumbly, the kind of cornbread you ate at a church potluck and pretended to like. Hattie sat on the kitchen floor. Her hair was up in a messy bun. Her shirt was streaked with batter. There was cornmeal in her eyelashes. She wanted to give up, until she remembered the line. It took me 11 tries. If Pearl could do 11 tries, Hattie could do 4. She stood up. She tried again. The fourth one came out gold on top, slightly dark around the edges where the batter had hit the screaming iron. The smell filled the kitchen. The smell carried out into the dining room. The smell traveled out through the front door, which Hattie had left propped open, and onto the sidewalk. Earl Tucker, who had been sitting on the bench outside, smelled it. He came in. He didn't say anything. Hattie cut a wedge, put it on a plate, slid it across the counter. Earl broke off a piece. He spread butter on it. The butter melted instantly. He put the piece in his mouth. He closed his eyes. He sat very, very still. The silence in the kitchen was the kind of silence that had weight to it, the kind of silence that was about to break. When Earl opened his eyes, they were wet. He looked at Hattie. He said very quietly, "That's Ruth's cornbread." Hattie sat down on the stool across from him. The two of them sat at the counter. Earl ate his cornbread. Hattie watched him eat it. Neither of them said anything else, because there wasn't anything else to say. The cornbread had said it all. She found the cassette tape that night. She had been looking for an extra spool of butcher paper in the office. She opened a drawer she hadn't opened yet, the one underneath the recipe binder. Inside, wrapped in a piece of soft yellow cloth, a cassette, the kind nobody made anymore. Black plastic, white label. The label was handwritten, Ruth, April, singing to the baby. Hattie sat down hard in the desk chair. She stared at the cassette. She did not know if she could do this. She thought, "I'm not ready." She thought, "I will never be ready." She thought, "If I don't play this now, I might lose my nerve and never play it." She got up. She walked through the kitchen. She walked through the dining room. There was an old radio on a shelf above the counter. Pearl's radio. It had a cassette deck. Hattie pulled the radio down. She set it on the counter. She plugged it in. She opened the cassette deck. Her hands were shaking so badly, she dropped the tape twice. She picked it up. She slid it in. She closed the door. She pressed play. A hiss. The hiss of old tape. The hiss of a recording made on cheap equipment a long, long time ago. And then a voice. Soft, female, young. "Hush, little baby. Don't say a word." Hattie's knees gave out. She slid down the side of the counter. She sat on the floor of the dining room. Her mother's voice. Her mother's voice. "Mama's gonna buy you a mockingbird." She had never heard her mother's voice before in her whole life. She did not, she could not. And if that mockingbird don't sing, she could not breathe. The voice was higher than Hattie expected, sweeter, slightly off key. the voice of a young woman, maybe 23, 24, singing into a small handheld tape recorder while she held a baby on her lap. The baby was Hattie. The baby was her. Mama's gonna buy you a diamond ring. In the background, a different sound, the soft cooing of a baby. Hattie heard herself, her own infant self, cooing along with her mother. She put both hands over her mouth. The sound that came out of her was not a word. It was older than words. It was the sound a soul makes when it finds something it did not know it had lost. The recording went on. Ruth sang the whole lullaby. Then she stopped. There was a soft laugh. Mama, Mama loves you, sweet pea. A small kiss. The unmistakable sound of a young mother kissing a baby's head. Then a different voice. Older, warm, a voice Hattie did not know but somehow recognized. Ruth, honey, let me try. Pearl, Mama, you can't sing for shit. A laugh so loud and so warm and so familiar to Hattie's ear that for 1 second she thought it had come out of her own throat. Then Pearl sang. She sang the next verse. Pearl Whitaker had a voice like dark honey, low, rough at the edges, the voice of a woman who had sung in church choirs and kitchens and on porches and to babies for 50 years. She sang to baby Hattie while Ruth held her, while the tape recorded 17 years ago, and 40 seconds into Pearl's verse, the recording cut off. The tape hissed. The dining room was silent. Hattie sat on the floor. She held the radio in her lap. She did not move for an hour. The next morning she found the death certificate. She had not been looking for it. She had been looking for the deed to the building. Frank Whitlock had asked her to bring it into his office to sign some paperwork. She had pulled open the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet, looking for the deed. She found a stack of folders, each one labeled in Pearl's handwriting. Hank Brentwood, P.I. Year 1. Hank Brentwood, P.I. Year 2, DSS Correspondence. Family Court Filings, Court of Cabarrus County. Petition denied, Court of Mecklenburg County. Petition denied. She opened folder after folder. Investigator reports, dead ends, letters Pearl had written to social workers, form letters that had come back saying the inquiry had been received and would be processed, court filings that went nowhere, bills from attorneys, and at the bottom of the very last folder, a single sheet of paper, photocopied, slightly faded, a death certificate. Hattie picked it up. She read, name of deceased Hattie Brennan, date of death April 14th, age at time of death 4 years, cause of death motor vehicle collision, filed by Dale Brennan, father. The death certificate shook in her hands. She read it again. She read her own name, her own birthday, her own age. Her father had filed a death certificate for her when she was 4. After her mother died in the accident, she had survived. He had told the state she was dead. He had killed her on paper so that nobody would come looking, so that nobody would find her, so that nobody could take her. He had erased her from the one person in the world who would have come. Pearl. Hattie set the death certificate down on the desk. She pressed her palms flat against the edges, as if she could hold it down, as if she could keep it from floating up and following her around forever. Her hands stopped shaking. They went perfectly still. She felt something inside her go quiet, the way water goes quiet just before it boils. Earl was at the counter when she walked out of the office. He saw her face. He set down his coffee. Hattie. She put the death certificate on the counter in front of him. He read it. He did not look surprised. He looked like a man who had been waiting for a long time for someone to ask him a question. Earl. Yes. You knew about this. Yes. How long? 6 years. She sat down on the stool next to him, the third stool from the left, the one nobody else ever sat in. She sat down on Earl's stool, and Earl let her, because some days you take whatever stool keeps you sitting upright. Earl, tell me. You sure? I'm sure. Earl pushed his coffee away. He folded his hands on the counter. He started talking. Pearl found out you were alive 12 years ago. She had hired a private investigator, a man named Hank Brentwood. He worked out of Macon. He was good, quiet. He didn't ask too many questions about why a woman in her 50s was looking for a granddaughter the state said was dead. At first he came up empty. There was a death certificate. The paperwork looked clean. But Pearl was stubborn the way granite is stubborn. She kept paying him. She told him, "Look harder." And in the 6th year, he found you. Hattie's breath went out of her. Where? Atlanta. You were 10. You were in a foster placement on the north side. She nodded. She remembered the placement. She had hated it. Pearl drove up the next morning. She told me she was going. She told me she was going to bring you home. She had your address. She had your photograph from a school directory. She had a court filing she had been working on with a lawyer in Atlanta. She had everything. Earl paused. She got there. She parked across the street. She watched you come out of the house. She told me later you were carrying a backpack that was too big for you and that you were eating a granola bar. Hattie remembered that backpack. She remembered eating granola bars on the way to school because the foster mother in that house had not believed in breakfast. She got out of the car. She started walking across the street. Earl stopped. His jaw was tight, and a man got out of a different car. He had been parked there too. He had been watching the house. Hattie went cold. Dale, your father, he was watching me. He had been watching you for years. He never approached you. He just watched, made sure nobody else came looking. He didn't want you. He wanted to keep you nobody. He saw Pearl. He recognized her. He stopped her in the middle of the street. Earl's voice went lower. And he told her that if she took one more step toward you, he would go to court the next morning and file for full custody as your biological father with a clean record, and he would win. And then he would take you out of state, and she would never see you again, even from a distance. Hattie covered her face with her hands. He held her. With your own safety, he said, Pearl, if you love that little girl, you walk away, because the second I get her, I will move her where you can never find her. And Pearl, who had been looking for you for years, Pearl, who had every paper in her bag to go file for custody that afternoon. Earl swallowed. She got back in her car. She drove home, and she cried in this restaurant, on this counter, for 2 days. Hattie did not move. She sat on the stool with her hands over her face. She did not give up. She kept looking. She kept hiring people. She kept writing letters. She just couldn't approach you because every time she got close, your father knew. And every time she got close, he reminded her what would happen if she pushed. He didn't want you. He just didn't want her to have you. Hattie's voice came out of her chest like something pulled by a hook. Why didn't she tell me? She tried, sweetheart. The week before she died, she wrote you the last letter. She told Frank to find you. She told him to give you everything. She ran out of time. Hattie sat for a long time with her face in her hands. Earl did not touch her. He just sat next to her. He waited. When she finally lifted her head, her face was streaked, her eyes were swollen, her voice was quiet. Earl. Yes. I need to call my aunt. Earl looked at her. Brenda. You know her. I know of her. Pearl knew of her. She lived in Macon when your mother died. She took you in for about a year. Then she gave me up. Yes. Hattie's throat closed. Earl. Did she know? Earl looked at the counter. Pearl thought so. That my father had lied. Pearl thought she knew. That I was alive. Pearl thought she had been told. By your father. Probably. To keep her quiet. Hattie's hands closed into fists. I need to talk to her. I figured. Earl pulled an old paper out of his shirt pocket. It had a phone number written on it, in Pearl's handwriting. She left this for you, he said, in case you ever wanted it. Hattie sat on the back step of the restaurant. The afternoon had turned overcast. The sky was the color of wet stone. She held the phone in her hand. The paper with Brenda's number was on the step next to her. She had been sitting there for 40 minutes. She rehearsed. "Hi, this is Hattie, your niece. Hi, you don't know me, but hi. You knew I was alive, didn't you?" She dialed. It rang. 4 times. 5. A woman answered. "Hello." The voice was tired, cautious, older than Hattie had expected. "Brenda?" "Yes." A pause, a long pause. Then very quietly, "Hattie." It was not a question. Hattie's throat closed. "How did you know?" "Because nobody else would call me and sound like that." Brenda's voice broke on the last word. She started crying. She did not try to hide it. Hattie sat on the step in Linden Creek, Georgia, listening to a woman she had not seen in 12 years cry into a phone. "I've been waiting for this call," Brenda said, "for a long time. I'm in Linden Creek, at Pearl's restaurant. I know about the restaurant. I heard Pearl died last year. You knew her. I knew of her. You knew she was alive." There was a very long silence. Brenda's voice came back smaller. "Yes. You knew I was alive. Yes." Hattie's breath was coming in short. "I need you to come here, Brenda. I need you to come here and tell me, to my face. Why?" A pause. Then, "When?" "Saturday." "I'll be there." The line went dead. Hattie sat on the step. The first raindrops started to fall. She did not move. She let them land on her hair and her face. They were cold. They were small. They were ordinary. She thought, "I am made of rain. I am made of rain and lullabies and yellow tulips and $47 and a wall with my name on it. I am made of 14 letters and a death certificate. I am made of a grandmother who walked away to keep me safe, and I am about to face the woman who handed me over." Brenda came on Saturday. She drove up in a dusty sedan. She sat in the driver's seat for 2 full minutes before she got out. She was smaller than Hattie expected. Late 40s, thin, hair cut short, going gray, deep lines around her mouth. She wore a plain blouse, slacks. She carried a purse with both hands like it was the only thing keeping her upright. She did not come to the door. She stood on the sidewalk and looked at the painted sign above it. Pearl's Porch. Hattie opened the door. They looked at each other. For a long second, Hattie waited for the rage she had been carrying for years, for a woman who had given her up, for a woman who had known, but the rage did not come. What came was a strange, tired quiet. Brenda looked like she had been punishing herself for 12 years. Brenda looked like someone Hattie did not have to hurt, because she had already hurt herself enough. "You came early," Hattie said. "I couldn't sleep." "Come in." Brenda walked in. She moved slowly. Her eyes traveled the walls, the photographs, the counter, the empty wall. She stopped in front of the photograph of Ruth holding baby Hattie in the yellow blanket. She stood there for a long time. Her shoulders shook once. She did not let herself cry. She had not earned it. That was what her body said. She turned to Hattie. "You look like her. Sit down." Brenda sat at the counter. Hattie stood behind it. The counter between them felt necessary, a barrier that allowed proximity without closeness. "Tell me," Hattie said. Brenda told her. She told her about how she had been a mess when Dale showed up with a 4-year-old. She told her about the husband who had walked out, the drinking she could not control, the rent she could not make. She told her how Dale had said it would only be for a few weeks, how he had left and never come back, how she had tried. For 11 months, she had tried until she could not, until she had called the state and signed the papers and put Hattie into foster care. She told her about the call from Pearl a year later, a woman she had never met, calling her, saying, "I am your brother's mother-in-law. I think he lied to me. I think my granddaughter is alive. Do you know where she is?" And Brenda had said, "I don't know what you're talking about." And she had hung up. She had hung up on her own niece's grandmother. Hattie's hands tightened on the edge of the counter. "Why?" Brenda looked at her hands. "Because Dale paid me." Hattie's stomach dropped. "What?" $6,000 to keep my mouth shut. About you, about the death certificate, about where you were. You took it. I took it. You took $6,000 to leave me in the system. Yes. To leave Pearl thinking I was dead. Yes. For 12 years. Yes. Brenda's voice broke. I spent it in 5 months. I didn't even spend it on anything that mattered. Rent, liquor, some clothes, a used car that broke down by the end of the year. I have lived with that money for 12 years, Hattie. I have lived with it. Every night, every morning, I have woken up to it. I have eaten my breakfast with it, sitting on the chair across from me. She slid off the stool. She got down on her knees, on the floor of Pearl's restaurant, in front of the granddaughter she had given up. I am not asking you to forgive me, she said. I am not asking for anything. I just want you to know. I am sorry. I am so sorry. I am so sorry. Hattie stood behind the counter. She did not move. She looked at this woman, this small, broken, 40-something woman, on her knees on the floor. She thought, I could hate you. I could throw you out. I could call the cops. I could tell every person in this town what you did. I could. She did not. What she said was, get up, Brenda. Brenda did not get up. I said, get up. Brenda got up. She stood, trembling, waiting for the verdict. Hattie said very quietly, I don't know what I'm going to do with you. I don't know if I'm going to forgive you. I don't know if I want to. I understand, but I am not going to spend the rest of my life carrying you, Brenda. I understand. You can leave now. Brenda nodded. She walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the knob. Hattie, what? If you ever decide that you want me to do anything, to make any of it, even a little, better, then what? Brenda turned. She looked at Hattie. Then call me, and I will be there before the phone stops ringing. She left. The bell jingled. The door closed. Hattie stood behind the counter. For a long time. Outside, it had started to rain. She walked through the dining room. She opened the front door. She stepped out into the rain. She stood under the awning of Pearl's porch. She watched Brenda's car pull away. She watched the taillights turn the corner. She watched the road go empty. Then she walked back inside. She went into the office. She sat at the desk. She opened the leather journal, the one she had been saving, the one Pearl had left half full. She turned to the first blank page. She picked up a pen. She wrote in her own handwriting on her grandmother's empty page, I do not know if I can forgive her. I do not know if I can forgive him. I do not know if forgiveness is even mine to give. I do not know if it is owed. I do not know if it would change anything. But I know this. I will not spend the rest of my life living inside my grandmother's grief. I will not live for her anger. I will not live for anyone's anger, not even my own. I am going to open this restaurant. I am going to feed people. I am going to leave the door open because that is what she did. And because that is maybe the only thing I know how to do. She closed the journal. She turned out the office light. She walked into the dining room. She stood in front of the wall of her mother's photographs. She put her hand against the empty space. She said softly, Mama, I think I'm going to need help with this. Outside the rain kept falling, but inside Pearl's porch the lights were still on. She opened 2 Saturdays later. She did not put up a flyer. She did not run an ad in the Linden Creek Gazette. She did not announce it on the church bulletin board, even though Pastor Hank had offered 3 times. She just unlocked the front door of Pearl's porch at 11 in the morning. She propped it open with a brick, and she walked back into the kitchen. The brick had been Pearl's brick. Hattie had found it under the back step, wrapped in newspaper, with a piece of masking tape that read in Pearl's handwriting, for when she opens up again. Pearl had known. Pearl had always known. Hattie had been awake since 4. She had not slept much in 2 weeks. She had been cooking, practicing, burning, trying again, reading Pearl's binder until her eyes ached, cooking each recipe until the cornbread tasted like her mother's, until the black-eyed pea soup hit her tongue and made her stop, until the pot roast came out the way Pearl had described it in a margin note. Brown the meat hard. Don't be afraid of the brown. She had not been afraid of the brown. She had a soup pot on the stove now, 3 gallons, bubbling slow. She had 2 cast iron skillets in the oven heating to 400. She had a tray of biscuits on the prep counter, ready to go in once the cornbread came out. She had 8 pounds of pot roast, braising in the lower oven, where it had been since 6 in the morning. Her hair was up in a bandana. Her apron was streaked with flour and butter. Her hands were the hands of a woman who had not stopped moving in 5 hours. She looked for the first time in her life like someone who belonged in a kitchen. She looked like her mother. Earl came in at 7:30, like he always did. He sat at his stool, third from the left. He poured himself a cup of coffee. He did not say good morning. He did not say, "Are you nervous?" He just looked at her through the pass-through. Then he said, "Pearl would have worn her good apron today." Hattie stopped. She looked at him. "What good apron?" Earl jerked his thumb toward a hook on the kitchen wall, behind the door, where Hattie hadn't bothered to look. Hattie walked over. On the hook, a faded blue apron, embroidered, the kind of needlework an old woman with patient hands had done over many winters. Across the front in white thread, Pearl's porch. Since 2002, and underneath that smaller, if you came in, you were family. Hattie's throat closed. She took it down. She tied it on over her work apron. Earl watched her. He nodded once. He picked up his newspaper. He did not say anything else, but his hand was shaking when he reached for his coffee. The way an old man's hand shakes when he sees a ghost wearing the right clothes. Birdie came in at 9. She did not bring food. She brought herself. She had on her best dress, blue, with a white collar. She had put on lipstick. Her hair was pinned up. She walked into the kitchen. "You sleep some, liar. Some." Birdie put her hands on her hips. She surveyed the kitchen. She looked at the pots, the biscuits, the skillets in the oven. She nodded. Then she said, "Tell me what to do." "Birdie, you have a diner across the street. I'm closed today. You can't close on a Saturday." "I just did." Hattie blinked. "Why?" Birdie's face softened. "Because today the only place in Linden Creek that needs to be open is this one." Hattie put down the spoon she was holding. She walked across this kitchen. She put her arms around Birdie. She had not hugged a grown woman in 3 years. Birdie hugged her back. Birdie smelled like talcum powder and bacon grease and aqua net hairspray. She smelled like every kind grandmother in every small town in the South. Birdie held on for exactly 5 seconds. Then she pulled back. She wiped Hattie's cheek with her thumb. She said, brisk and businesslike, "Tell me what to do, sugar. I'll do it. Just don't ask me to cook. I love Pearl, but I have my own recipes." Hattie laughed. She laughed. She had not laughed in 2 weeks. She put Birdie on the dish station. Birdie tied on an apron. She rolled up her sleeves. She got to work. Brenda arrived at 10. Hattie heard the car pull up. She did not look up from the soup pot. She heard the door of the restaurant open. The bell jingled. Brenda stepped inside. Hattie wiped her hands on her apron. She walked out into the dining room. Brenda stood near the door. She was wearing a plain gray dress, no makeup. Her hair was pulled back. She looked like a woman who had spent the last week cleaning out the parts of herself she could not look at anymore. She did not say good morning. She held up a small canvas bag. "I brought an apron. From home. I didn't know if I should bring one, so I brought one." Hattie looked at her. She looked at the canvas bag. She looked at the woman who had taken $6,000 to leave her in the system, the woman who had hung up on Pearl Whitaker, the woman who had spent 12 years living with what she had done. Hattie said, "You're on dishes with Birdie." Brenda nodded. She did not cry. She did not thank her. She did not say anything. She just walked behind the counter, through the kitchen door, past Bertie, who looked her up and down with the appraising eye of an older woman sizing up a younger one. Bertie said, "You wash, I rinse." Brenda said, "Yes, ma'am." And they got to work. Hattie watched them from the dining room. Two women, one who had loved Pearl, one who had betrayed her, standing at the same sink, washing the same dishes for Pearl's granddaughter, Hattie thought. This is what forgiveness looks like, maybe. Not the big kind, not the kind in books, just two women at a sink doing the next thing. She did not know. She was 18. She did not know much yet. But she knew watching them that the world was bigger than she had been told. At 11, she unlocked the front door. She propped it open with Pearl's brick. She stood behind the counter. She waited for 1 minute, 2. The street was quiet. Hattie thought, what if nobody comes? What if I have spent 2 weeks cooking and I open the door and nobody comes? What if Linden Creek forgot? What if the town moved on? What if Earl is the only one who a pickup truck pulled up? A man got out, mid-60s, boots, a John Deere cap. He stood on the sidewalk and looked at the open door. He took off his cap. He walked in. He sat down at table 4. He said very quietly to nobody, "Lord, it smells like her in here." Hattie poured him a cup of coffee. He looked up. "You must be Hattie." "Yes, sir." "My name's Cliff Mayhew. Pearl fed me Sunday lunch every Sunday for 14 years. Since my wife passed, I never paid for one of those lunches, not one, because Pearl wouldn't take my money. She said I'd been a good husband, and good husbands eat for free." He paused. "I have been carrying that meal money for 3 years, in an envelope, in my truck. I keep meaning to do something with it, but I didn't know what." He reached into his jacket. He pulled out a thick envelope. He set it on the table. "I figure it belongs to you now." Hattie picked up the envelope. It was heavy. She did not open it. She set it down. She said, "What was your Sunday lunch, Mr. Mayhew?" "Pot roast." "You're in luck." He smiled. It was a small smile, but it was the smile of a man who had not had a Sunday lunch in 3 years. He sat back in his chair. The bell jingled. A woman walked in. The next hour blurred. Pastor Hank came. He brought his sister and his sister's husband and the husband's brother who had driven up from Macon. Miss Lou came. She brought a fresh bouquet of yellow tulips. She set them on the counter where she had set them every Tuesday for 30 years. Doreen, the nurse, came. She had on her hospital scrubs because she was working a shift later. She sat at the counter. She ordered everything on the menu. The mayor came. He was a quiet man in a corduroy jacket. He sat by the window. He did not say anything. He just looked at the photographs on the wall. 3 women from the church came. They had baked a pie. Peach. 4 after. The owner of the hardware store, the man who had bought it from Earl when Earl retired, came with his teenage son. By 12:30, every table was full. 22 people. 22 people Hattie had not invited. 22 people who had heard somehow by Linden Creek's invisible telephone that Pearl's porch was open again. 22 people who had come. Hattie cooked. She moved between the stove and the pass-through and the prep counter. Bertie and Brenda washed and rinsed and stacked. Earl sat at the counter and refilled coffee cups for anyone who needed one. He moved up and down the counter with the carafe like he had done it 100 times before. Maybe he had. The food went out. Pot roast dark and tender with carrots and potatoes that had cooked in the same juice for hours. Cornbread golden, slightly crispy on the bottom, served in baskets lined with dish towels. Black-eyed pea soup, smoky and rich. Biscuits with butter and Bertie's peach preserves. Hattie did not have time to be nervous. She was too busy being a cook. She watched plates come back empty. She watched Mr. Mayhew take his first bite of pot roast. He chewed slowly. He closed his eyes. He set down his fork. He sat there, just sat. Then he picked up his fork. He took another bite. He cried into his pot roast. He did not try to stop crying. The woman at the next table reached over. She put her hand on his shoulder. She did not say anything. That was how Linden Creek did it. When a grown man cried over pot roast in a restaurant, you put your hand on his shoulder. You let him eat. At 1 o'clock, Pastor Hank stood up. He did not say anything. He just stood up at his table. He bowed his head. The room noticed. One by one, every fork went down. The chatter quieted. The clink of plates stopped. Earl behind the counter stopped pouring coffee. Pastor Hank closed his eyes. He said very quietly in a voice the whole room could hear, "Pearl Whitaker, you sweet, stubborn, beautiful woman. We are sitting in your house. We are eating your food. We are looking at your wall." A pause. "And your granddaughter is here. She is home." A longer pause. "Lord, thank you for Pearl, for Ruth, for Hattie." The room was silent. "Amen." A soft chorus. "Amen." Hattie stood behind the counter. Her hands were on the edge of the wood. Her knuckles were white. She did not cry because she was the cook. And the cook does not cry in front of her customers. Not yet. The bell jingled. Hattie did not look up at first. She was plating a piece of cornbread. She was reaching for the butter. But something made her look. A girl was standing in the doorway. She was 16 maybe. She was thin. She was wearing a jacket that was too light for the weather. The kind of jacket a kid wears when she's running. The kind of jacket Hattie herself had worn out of the group home 2 weeks ago. The girl's hands were shoved in her pockets. Her eyes were doing the thing Hattie knew, the slow sweep of a room, checking the exits, counting the people, looking for who was paying attention to her and who wasn't, and how much trouble she was about to be in for walking in. Hattie set down the cornbread. She came around the counter. She walked slowly. She walked the way you walk toward an animal that has been hit too many times by people who said they wouldn't. She stopped 2 feet from the girl. She did not crowd her. She said, "Hi." The girl said nothing. "You hungry?" The girl nodded. A small nod, almost imperceptible. Hattie said, "Come sit at the counter." The girl hesitated. "What's it cost?" Hattie almost laughed. But she didn't, because the question was not a joke. The question was the question every kid like her had ever asked, because every kid like her had been taught that nothing was free, and that the people who told you it was free were the ones you had to watch out for the most. Hattie said, "It costs nothing today." Why? "Because today's the opening day, and today the food is on the house." The girl looked at her. Her eyes were not quite trusting, but they weren't not trusting either. She walked to the counter. She picked the stool closest to the door, the escape route, the exit. Hattie noted this. She did not comment on it. She just got behind the counter. She set a bowl in front of the girl. She filled it with soup. She put a piece of cornbread on a small plate. She slid the butter dish over. She did not stand there. She did not hover. She turned and walked away, back into the kitchen, where she could see the girl through the pass-through, but where the girl could eat without feeling watched. She knew, because she had been the girl. The girl ate slowly at first, then she ate faster. Then she ate the way Hattie had eaten Birdie's eggs on the second morning, like she had not been fed in days, like she did not know when she would be fed again. Hattie refilled the bowl. She did not ask. She just filled it. The girl ate the second bowl. The girl ate the cornbread. The girl ate 3 pieces of cornbread. She drank 2 glasses of sweet tea. When she was done, she sat at the counter and stared at her empty bowl. Her shoulders went a little loose. Just a little. The kind of loose a body gets when it remembers it is allowed to relax. Hattie came around the counter. She sat on the stool next to her. She did not ask the girl's name. She did not ask where she had come from. She did not ask where she was going. She said, "My name's Hattie." The girl looked at her sideways. "Lila." "Lila what?" "Lila Whitcomb." "How old are you, Lila?" A pause. 16. "You staying with someone?" A longer pause. "Sort of." Hattie nodded. She did not push. Across the counter, Pastor Hank had noticed. He was watching. He was the kind of man who noticed. Earl had noticed too. Earl had set down his coffee carafe. He was watching from the end of the counter. the way an old soldier watches a door. Hattie said, "Lila, I'm going to need help around here. Washing dishes, sweeping, wiping down tables. I can't pay much yet, but there's food, and there's a place to sit. If you come by tomorrow, after whatever else you got going on." Lila looked at her. The girl's mouth tightened. Her eyes were the eyes of a kid who had been promised things and not gotten them. "You serious?" "I'm serious." "Why?" Hattie thought about that. She did not say, "Because I see myself in you." She did not say, "Because somebody did this for me." She did not say, "Because Pearl would have wanted me to." She said, "Because I have an extra stool, and it's better with somebody in it." Lila looked at her for a long time. Then she nodded. "Tomorrow, tomorrow." Lila slid off the stool. She walked to the door. She stopped. She turned around. She said in a voice so quiet only Hattie heard it, "Thank you." She walked out. The bell jingled. The door closed. Hattie stood at the counter. She watched Lila disappear down the sidewalk. She thought, "Pearl, are you seeing this?" That night after the last customer left, Hattie sat at the counter. The dining room was clean. Brenda had washed every dish. Bertie had wiped every table. Earl had swept the floor. The three of them had stayed past sundown. They had not said much, but they had stayed. Brenda left first. She gathered her things. She walked to the door. She turned. "Hattie?" "Yes." Can I come back next Saturday?" "Yes." Brenda nodded. She did not say thank you. She left. Bertie left next. She kissed Hattie on the forehead. She said, "Good first day, sugar." She walked across the street to her own dark diner. Earl stayed. He sat on his stool for a long time. When he finally got up, he tipped his cap. He said, "You did good." Hattie said, "I had help." Earl said, "Pearl had help too." He walked to the door. He stopped. "Hattie." "Yes." "That girl, Lila, she is going to come tomorrow." "I know. She is going to come." "I know, Earl. And you are going to have to figure out where she lives and what she eats and what she does on the days you don't see her." "I know." He looked at her. "You're 18, Hattie." "I know." "Pearl was 34 when she took on Ruth alone." "I know." "You are going to be all right." He tipped his cap. He left. Hattie sat at the counter. The lights were low. The brick was still in the doorway. She had not moved it. The door was still open. Frank Whitlock called on Monday morning. Hattie was in the kitchen, wrapping leftover pot roast in foil. The phone rang in the office. She picked up. "Hattie, this is Frank." "Hi, Frank. I need you to come down to my office. There's something I should have told you sooner. I wasn't sure when, but I think now is the time." "Is something wrong?" "No, Hattie. Something is right, I think." She walked to his office. It was 3 blocks. She walked it in 5 minutes. Frank Whitlock was waiting at the door. He was a tall man, late 60s, soft eyes, the kind of country lawyer who had been a country lawyer his whole life and had never wanted to be anything else. He brought her into his office. He sat her down. He pulled a folder from his desk. "Hattie, your grandmother set up more than just the restaurant. She set up a trust." "A trust." "A small one. Modest, but a trust." He opened the folder. He turned it toward her. The first page said in elegant printed lettering, "The Open Door Fund, established by Pearl Whitaker, in memory of Ruth Whitaker, for the benefit of children of the foster system." Hattie did not understand. She read it again. She still did not understand. "Frank?" "Yes." "What is this?" Frank Whitlock folded his hands on the desk. "Pearl set this up 9 years ago, 5 years after she stopped being able to approach you, after your father blocked her in Atlanta. She came to me. She said, 'Frank, I cannot save my own grandchild, but there are other Hatties out there, and I am going to do something, so I do not lose my mind from grief.'" Hattie's mouth had gone dry. "What did she do?" "She put aside money every month. She did not have a lot, but she had enough, and she gave it to me. And she said, 'Find foster kids who are aging out. Find ones who need a meal or a coat or a bus ticket or a year's rent. He paused. In 9 years, Hattie, your grandmother, quietly fed and clothed and helped pay for the lives of 4 young people. Four. Four. Their names are in this folder. 2 girls, 2 boys. The oldest is now 26. The youngest is 21. They all live. They all work. One is in nursing school. One is a mechanic. One has 2 children of her own. Hattie put her hand over her mouth. They did not know it was Pearl. She insisted. She said the help had to be anonymous. She did not want gratitude. She just wanted to do something with the love she could not give to you. She could not save you, so she saved them as best she could from a distance. Hattie looked at the folder. She did not pick it up. She just looked at it. She thought. She did not give up. Not even in the worst of it. Not even when she could not find me. Not even when she had been told she was crazy. Not even when her own brother-in-law, twice removed in Macon, told her to stop looking. She took her love and she put it where she could put it. She fed children, anonymously, for 9 years. Frank slid the folder toward her. There is still money in the fund, Hattie, enough to keep helping. 2 or 3 children, for maybe 10 years. If you want it to continue, the fund is yours now. The decisions are yours. Hattie picked up the folder. She held it in her lap. She did not open it. She said very quietly, I want it to continue. Frank nodded. I thought you might. He paused. One more thing. There is a name on the first page. A girl. She came to the food bank in Macon last month. A volunteer there is on Pearl's old contact list. The volunteer called me. The girl is 16. She's been in placement for a year. She's been struggling. Her name is, he looked at the page, Lila Whitcomb. Hattie's head came up. The world stopped. For 1 second, she thought, no, that is not possible. That is not how the world works. She said out loud, Lila Whitcomb. Frank looked at her. Yes. She came into the restaurant yesterday. Frank's eyebrows went up. Hattie. Frank, are you telling me? I gave her soup. I told her to come back today. I offered her a job. Frank, I did not know. I did not know. Was she? Did Pearl? Frank's face changed. Hattie, I don't know how Pearl could have known. She had set up the fund. The volunteer at the food bank had Lila on a watch list. But Lila, walking into Pearl's porch the day after you opened, that was. He stopped. He looked at his hands. He said very softly, that was nothing your grandmother arranged. Pearl died before Lila showed up in the system. Then how? Frank did not answer right away. When he did, his voice was the voice of an old country lawyer who had seen a lot of things he could not explain. Some things, Hattie, do not have answers. They just have, whatever you want to call it, the hand of God, the pull of the universe, the way one open door sometimes finds another. Hattie stood up. She walked out of his office. She did not say goodbye. She walked back to the restaurant. Lila was waiting on the sidewalk. She was wearing the same too-light jacket. She was holding a backpack. When she saw Hattie, she stiffened, like she expected to be turned away. Hattie walked up to her. She said, You came. I said I would. Where are you staying? A pause. Around. Yeah, Hattie nodded slowly. She said, I have a room behind the office. It's small. There's a cot, a lamp, a window that looks out on the alley. It's not much. Lila looked at her. Why? Hattie thought about that question. She had been asked it twice now, by the same girl, in 2 days. She did not say, because I see myself in you. She did not say, because Pearl set up a fund 9 years ago to help kids like you. She did not say, because the world is bigger and stranger and kinder than I knew. She said, because the door's open. Lila looked at the propped open front door of Pearl's porch. She looked at the brick. She looked at the painted sign. She looked at Hattie. She said, okay. And she walked inside. Dale's letter came on a Wednesday. 3 weeks later, a plain white envelope. No return address. A Georgia postmark. Hattie was wiping down the counter When the mail came through the slot, she walked over. She picked it up. She knew before she opened it who it was from. She knew the way an animal knows, the way blood knows. She opened it standing up. The handwriting was thin, slanted, the hand of a man who had not written much in his life. Hattie, I heard about your inheritance. From your aunt. We had a conversation. She felt the need to tell me some things. As your father, I want you to know that I had reasons for what I did, reasons you cannot understand, and reasons I will not explain in a letter. Your grandmother and I had a long history. Not all of it is in those letters of hers. Whatever she told you about me was incomplete. I am willing to come to Linden Creek to discuss the estate. As your only living parent, I have certain rights, which I will not press if you and I can come to an arrangement. Call me at the number below. Dale. Hattie stood at the counter. She read it once. She did not read it twice. She walked to the kitchen. She turned on the gas burner. She held the letter over the flame. She watched the corner catch. She watched the flame eat the paper slowly, 1 inch at a time. She watched her father's handwriting curl and blacken and turn to ash. She dropped the last burning corner in the sink. She turned on the water. She washed the ashes down the drain. She turned off the burner. She walked back into the dining room. Lila was at the counter doing her math homework. She looked up. Who was that from? Nobody. Hattie. Lila? Who? Hattie looked at her. She thought about lying. She did not lie. She said it was from a man who is not allowed in this restaurant. Not now, not ever. And that's the end of it. Lila looked at her. She did not push. She went back to her math. Earl at his stool did not look up from his newspaper, but his eyes had narrowed. And in the kitchen, Brenda, who came every Saturday to wash dishes and never asked for more than that, who had heard the word Dale slip out of Hattie's mouth in the back office once when she didn't know Brenda could hear. Brenda set down the bowl she was drying. She walked out to the dining room. She said, Hattie, yes. Did he write? Yes. What did he say? He said he wanted to talk. Brenda's face went still. What did you do? I burned it. A pause. Good. Brenda did not say anything else. She walked back to the kitchen. She picked up the bowl. She kept drying. That was the closest thing Hattie had ever heard to her aunt apologizing, and it was in some way enough. She never called him. She never wrote back. She never spoke to Dale Brennan again. Frank Whitlock, when he heard, sent a single registered letter to the Georgia address, a polite letter, the kind of letter only a country lawyer can write. It said in the most courteous language possible, Mr. Brennan, per Mrs. Whitaker's will, you have no standing to contest the estate. Per Miss Brennan's wishes, you have no standing to contact her. Per the falsified death certificate filed 14 years ago, which we have copies of, you have considerable standing in front of a grand jury. We recommend you do not press the matter. Dale did not press the matter. He did not write again. He disappeared the way men like him do. Hattie did not press the matter either. She did not press charges. She did not pursue justice. She did not pursue closure. She said to Earl one evening, "He's not worth my Saturdays, Earl." Earl thought about that. He said, "That's the wisest thing I've heard somebody your age say in 50 years. She did not forgive him. She did not need to. She just left him outside the door, which is its own kind of justice. Brenda kept coming every Saturday. She washed dishes. She wiped down tables. She came at 10 in the morning. She left at 9 at night. She drove back to Macon. She slept 4 hours. She did it all again the next week. She did not ask Hattie for forgiveness again. She did not call her honey. She did not call her sweetheart. She did not call herself Hattie's aunt. She just worked for a year and then for another year. She paid her own way. She brought her own lunch. She bought a small house in Linden Creek the second year, a 2-bedroom on the edge of town. She painted it yellow. She and Hattie did not vacation together. They did not exchange Christmas presents. They did not call each other. But Brenda showed up every Saturday, and Hattie let her work. That was the relationship. Some relationships are like that. They do not heal. They just continue in a way that is its own kind of healing. Lila moved into the back room the same week Dale's letter came. It was a small room, the room Pearl had once slept in when she closed late. Hattie put a real bed in it, a second-hand dresser from a yard sale on Hickory Street, a reading lamp, a small bookshelf which she filled with books one Saturday at the Linden Creek Library, where the local librarian had said, "Take whatever the girl wants. She can return them whenever." Lila started high school in the fall. She was quiet at first. She made a friend by Halloween. By Christmas, two more. She joined the choir. She had a voice, a small, sweet voice, the kind of voice that surprised people the first time they heard it. Hattie filed for temporary guardianship in October. Frank Whitlock handled the paperwork. He waived his fee. He said, "This one's on me." The new wall got built that fall. Hattie hung her own photograph. Earl had taken it. On opening day, Hattie behind the counter, her hair up in a bandana, flour on her hands, her mother's apron tied over her own. The empty wall behind her now had her face in the center of it, but she did not fill the wall. She hung the photo, and then she left space, to the left and to the right, and below and above. She hung Lila's school photo next in October, smaller, to the right of her own. She hung a photo Earl had taken of Mr. Mayhew eating his Sunday pot roast. She hung a photo of Pastor Hank helping a kid named Tyler with his homework on a Tuesday afternoon when Tyler had nowhere else to go. She hung a photo of Birdie standing in the middle of the dining room with her hands on her hips, boss of the dish station. She hung a photo of Pearl in the doorway, arms open wide. She left empty spaces, lots of them, because there were going to be more. There were going to be more. She knew that now. On a Tuesday night in November, after she had locked the front door, Hattie went into the office. She opened the drawer. She took out the cassette tape. She walked into the dining room. She set it in the radio. She pressed play. The hiss came on, and then her mother's voice. "Hush, little baby. Don't say a word." Hattie sat at the counter. In the dark, Lila came out of the back room, in her pajamas, sleepy. She had heard the music. She did not say anything. She walked over. She sat on the stool next to Hattie. She listened. Ruth's voice sang. Then Pearl's voice sang. Both of them, together, to baby Hattie, 17 years ago. Lila said quietly, "That's her, and my mother, and my grandmother. They sound nice." They were. Lila leaned her head against Hattie's shoulder. Hattie did not move. She held her breath. It was the first time in her life another human being had leaned on her for comfort. She did not cry. She just sat. She listened to her mother sing. She felt the weight of Lila against her arm. She thought, this is what Pearl built. Not a restaurant, not a building, not a sign. This. On the last evening of the story, Hattie stood at the open door. It was December, cold. The air was sharp with wood smoke. Down the street somebody had hung Christmas lights early. Inside the dining room glowed. Earl was on his stool, his third from the left. He was reading the paper. He had read it for an hour. He would read it for another hour. Birdie was crossing the street from her diner. She had a casserole in her hands. She was bringing it over to share, the way she did 3 nights a week now. Lila was at the counter, doing her homework, her hair in a French braid, the braid that Hattie had learned to do from a YouTube video. Brenda was in the kitchen, washing the day's dishes. She had stayed late. She had said she'd close up. She had said it without looking at Hattie, which was the way Brenda said most things. Pastor Hank's wife, who had passed years ago, was on the wall now too. Hattie had found a photo of her in Pearl's files. She had framed it. She had asked Pastor Hank if it was okay. He had cried for 10 minutes before he said yes. Lou Pritchett's yellow tulips were on the counter. Pearl's brass key, the original, the one that had opened the front door 14 years too late. It was on a small shelf above the cash register, in a frame, next to a small handwritten card that read, "The door is open." The cassette tape was next to the key, in its own small frame, with its own small card. The voice is here. Hattie stood at the open door. She looked out at the cold street. She thought about Pearl. She thought about how Pearl had spent 14 years looking, about how Pearl had spent 9 years quietly funding other people's children when she could not save her own, about how Pearl had died 8 months too early. She thought about how she would never meet her. She thought about how, in another way, she had met her every single day for 9 months. Every recipe, every photograph, every letter, every word in the journal, every name on the open door fund list, every empty space on the wall, every brick at the door. Pearl was here. Pearl had built it so that she would be here, even after she was gone. Hattie touched the door frame. She said softly to the cold street and to the empty sidewalk and to the woman she would never meet, "Pearl, hi." A pause. "I made it home." Behind her in the warm dining room, Bertie laughed at something Earl said. Lila looked up from her math homework. Brenda dried a bowl. Hattie said, "I will keep the door open." She did not say it to anyone in particular, but she meant it the way a vow is meant. She stepped back inside. The door stayed propped on Pearl's brick. The lights were on. The food was warm. The wall had spaces left for more pictures. And, down the street, Hattie did not know it yet, but a boy of 15 who had been hitchhiking south for 2 days would walk past Pearl's porch in the morning. He would smell biscuits coming through the open door. He would look in the window. He would see a girl in a bandana behind the counter, refilling someone's coffee. He would think for the first time in 2 days, maybe I'll stop. And he would, because the door was open, because Pearl had opened it, because Hattie had kept it open, because some doors, once they are opened by the right woman, are never closed again.